What if World War II had ended differently? What if a single secret weapon had changed the course of history? During the most destructive conflict in human history, military scientists were racing against time to create next-generation weapons, some that were decades ahead of their time, and others so bizarre that they sound like science fiction. Imagine a stealth bomber flying over enemy lines in 1944, a floating aircraft carrier made of ice, or a space-based superweapon capable of setting entire cities on fire from orbit. These aren't scenes from a sci-fi movie. These were real projects designed and in some cases even tested during World War II. Some of these experimental technologies were abandoned, others were stopped just before they could see battle. But if things had gone just a little differently, they could have reshaped history as we know it. Let's dive into the most secretive and shocking wartime inventions that never made it to the battlefield, and how they almost changed everything. The Nazis had a name for their secret weapons, Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons. Hitler and his top engineers believed that advanced technology could turn the tide of war, and they poured resources into developing futuristic superweapons. Some of these were on the brink of mass production, others were little more than desperate dreams. Decades before the United States built the B-2 stealth bomber, Germany had its own version, the Horten Ho 229. This radical aircraft was designed with a flying wing shape, reducing its radar signature and making it harder to detect. If the Nazis had perfected this plane sooner, they could have launched devastating attacks on Britain, or even across the Atlantic. In early tests, the Ho 229 was fast, agile, and unlike anything seen before. But there was one major problem. Germany was running out of resources. The war was already turning against them, and they never got the chance to build these planes in large numbers. But imagine if they had? What if entire squadrons of stealth bombers had been unleashed? The skies over Europe, and maybe even the United States, could have looked very different. Now this one sounds completely insane, but it's true. German scientists actually proposed an orbital weapon, a massive mirror placed in space that could concentrate sunlight and burn entire cities from above. It was called the sun gun. This idea came from Nazi scientists working on spaceflight, who believed that by launching a huge concave mirror into orbit, they could focus the sun's rays like a magnifying glass and incinerate their enemies. The problem? Well, besides the fact that it was straight out of a supervillain's playbook, launching a giant space mirror in the 1940s was impossible. Even if the war had lasted longer, the technology just wasn't there. But imagine if it had been the world's first orbital weapon, before the space race even began. Most people know about the German V-2 rocket, the world's first ballistic missile, but the Nazis had another long-range weapon, the V-3 Supergun. Instead of launching missiles, this was a massive artillery cannon, designed to fire explosive shells over 100 miles, straight into London. The gun was so huge it had to be built into a mountainside in northern France. If it had worked, it could have bombarded Britain non-stop without the need for planes or rockets. But before it could go operational, Allied bombers destroyed the test site. The V-3 never got its chance to rain destruction down on London. But it was one of Hitler's most ambitious and terrifying projects. And then, there's Die Glocke. This is one of the most mysterious Nazi projects of all time. Some claim it was an anti-gravity device, others say it was a time machine. The truth? We don't really know. Die Glocke, German for the bell, was supposedly a secret experiment involving exotic materials and high-speed spinning cylinders. Some believe it was an attempt to create a propulsion system unlike anything seen before, something that could have led to advanced aircraft or even UFO-like technology. Of course, much of this is speculation. The real question is, what was the Nazi high command working on in their secret underground bunkers, and how much of that research disappeared after the war? We may never know the full truth. These are just a few of the many experimental weapons Nazi Germany tried to develop. Some were real, some were myths, and some were simply too advanced for their time. But what if they had been deployed in full force? Could the war have ended differently? Next, we'll look at the Allied secret weapons. Because Germany wasn't the only country with strange and deadly experiments in the works. Germany wasn't the only country experimenting with radical new technology during World War II. The Allies had their own secret weapons, some of which were just as bizarre, and others that could have changed the war in unexpected ways. While some of these ideas sound crazy, a few actually worked. In the early years of the war, German U-boats were wreaking havoc in the Atlantic, sinking supply ships and cutting off critical resources. The British needed a solution, and they turned to ice. Project Habakkuk was the brainchild of Geoffrey Pike, who proposed building a massive aircraft carrier out of a special material called pykrete, a mixture of ice and wood pulp. This frozen behemoth would be virtually unsinkable and capable of launching air raids from the middle of the ocean. Sounds ridiculous? It actually worked. Pykrete was so strong that in tests bullets barely made a dent in it. Churchill himself approved the idea and a prototype was built in Canada. But there was a problem. Keeping a giant floating ice ship frozen required a lot of refrigeration. And by the time the design was ready, steel was no longer in short supply. The project was scrapped. But for a moment, the Allies nearly had an indestructible floating fortress. What's the most unconventional way to destroy a city? If you said, exploding bats, congratulations, you think like a WWII scientist. The United States actually developed a plan to weaponize bats. The idea was simple but deadly. Attach tiny incendiary bombs to thousands of bats, release them over Japanese cities, and let them roost in wooden buildings before the bombs exploded. During testing, the bat bombs worked a little too well. Some escaped and accidentally burned down part of an American test facility. The project was eventually canceled in favor of the atomic bomb, but if it had been used, it could have devastated Japan's wooden cities in a terrifyingly efficient way. But the strangest weapon actually came from Japan. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a missile, it was a balloon. In a desperate attempt to strike the American mainland, Japan launched 9,000 Fugo balloon bombs, each carrying incendiary explosives. These balloons rode the jet stream across the Pacific Ocean, drifting for days before landing in North America. Most failed to cause damage, but one did explode in Oregon, tragically killing 6 civilians, the only wartime deaths on U.S. soil. The government kept the attacks a secret to prevent panic, but if the bombs had been more effective, they could have started massive wildfires and terrorized the American West. From ice warships to bat bombs, these weapons were as creative as they were unpredictable. Some were impractical, some were ahead of their time, but they all prove one thing. In war, innovation can be as powerful as firepower. But what if just one of these experimental weapons had been fully realized? What if history had taken a different path? In the next section, we explore the what-if scenarios, how these secret weapons could have changed World War II forever. History is filled with what-if moments. Wars are often won or lost by the smallest details, an engineering breakthrough, a scientific discovery, or a single strategic decision. So what if just one of these secret weapons had worked as intended? Could it have changed the outcome of World War II? Let's start with the Horten Ho 229, the world's first stealth bomber. If Germany had mass-produced these aircraft and deployed them earlier in the war, they could have launched devastating attacks on Britain, maybe even reached the United States. Without proper radar detection, the Allies would have struggled to counter these bombers, possibly forcing a shift in air superiority. Could this have extended the war, or even forced a different outcome? It's impossible to say for sure, but stealth technology decades ahead of its time could have been a game-changer. Now let's take things to the extreme, the sun gun. This was one of the most ambitious and ridiculous Nazi superweapons. If Germany had somehow developed the ability to place an orbital mirror in space, it could have held entire nations hostage with the threat of fiery destruction from above. Of course, the technology simply wasn't there. Even today, something like this would be a massive challenge. But if World War II had dragged on, with further advancements in rocketry, could we have seen the first weaponized use of space? It's a chilling thought. On the Allied side, imagine if Project Habakkuk, the giant ice aircraft carrier, had been completed. This floating fortress could have acted as an unsinkable airbase in the middle of the Atlantic, giving the Allies air superiority anywhere, anytime. Would it have changed the course of the naval war? Maybe. but the sheer scale and logistical nightmare of keeping a giant ice block frozen meant it was doomed from the start. Still, it's a reminder of just how far military minds were willing to go for an advantage. Now, what about one of the strangest but most effective Allied experiments? The bat bombs. If these had been deployed over Japan, the result could have been catastrophic. Thousands of bats would have roosted in wooden buildings before simultaneously setting them ablaze. Considering how much of Tokyo and other Japanese cities were made of wood at the time, bat bombs might have caused even more destruction than conventional bombings. Could they have ended the war without the use of nuclear weapons? It's a question worth asking. And then, there's Japan's Fugo balloon bombs. If the jet stream had carried them more effectively, or if they had been equipped with more powerful explosives, these attacks could have caused widespread fires, disrupted the American war effort, and even triggered mass panic. But in the end, they were too unreliable. Most fell into the ocean or landed harmlessly. Still, it's haunting to think that Japan successfully attacked the US mainland during the war, and most Americans never even knew about it. Of course, history played out the way it did for a reason. Some of these weapons were too impractical, others were too late, and some were simply ahead of their time. But they remind us just how close the world came to a very different version of history. One where stealth bombers darkened the skies in 1944, one where the ocean carried an aircraft carrier made of ice. One where bats, not bombs, rained down destruction from above. But in the end, war isn't just one with weapons, it's one with strategy, intelligence, and sometimes a little bit of luck. World War II was a time of desperation, innovation, and rapid technological advancement. The race for superior weaponry led to some of the most ambitious and bizarre experiments in military history. Some of these weapons could have changed the course of the war. Others were doomed from the start, but one thing is clear. Had just a few things gone differently, if one of these experimental technologies had been fully realized, the world we live in today might look very different. And yet, many of these failed ideas weren't forgotten. The stealth technology of the Horten Ho 229 laid the groundwork for modern stealth bombers like the B-2 Spirit. The research behind Nazi rocketry led directly to the space race and the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Even the seemingly absurd ideas, like ice ships and bat bombs, pushed the boundaries of military thinking. In a way, the secret weapons of World War II didn't just shape the war, they shaped the future. War often drives innovation, but it also serves as a reminder of the fine line between science and science fiction. What may seem impossible today could become reality tomorrow. The question is, will we use these advancements for destruction, or for something greater? What do you think? Which of these secret weapons do you believe could have truly changed history? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of history. Thanks for watching.